It's time to look ahead to Game Week 23, and we've finally got a couple of new signings and new names to talk about in the waiver pile. Welcome back to the Draft FC podcast, the podcast website and YouTube channel dedicated to all things official Draft FPL. My name is Mitch and I'm your host for another Game Week preview, going over waiver options, hidden gems and general Premier League chat ahead of Game Week 23. So the January transfer window is slowly warming up. There are still 10 days to go before the window closes on the 3rd of February. So we've got this game week, then Game Week 24 with double fixtures for Everton and Liverpool. And then by the Game Week 25 waiver window, the transfer window will have been firmly sealed shut and all the players will be in there for us to try and claim. So in this episode, as will likely be the case for next week and probably the one after, I'll cover some of the new arrivals to the league, as well as doing all of the usual waiver tips for the coming weeks. As ever, if you enjoy this content or if you're just discovering this for the first time, give us a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any of our future episodes and any of our future draft content as it comes out. So I'm recording this episode on Thursday, the 23rd of January, so any team news, injury developments or press conference info are up to date as of then, and of course, subject to change. Some of the players that I'll be discussing in this episode include Daniel Marlon, Omar Marmoush, plus a whole load of mediocre Everton and Liverpool players, so let's get straight into it. So before we get into the players, a reminder the waiver deadline will be at the slightly later time to the conventional slot at 1:30 UK time tomorrow, Friday the 24th of January, ahead of the main game week deadline, which will be 24 hours later at 1:30 on Saturday the 25th. So there's no early kickoff on Saturday. Let's have a quick look at Waiver Watch, looking at the players that you were bringing in and getting rid of ahead of Game Week 22 last week. We had right at the top, you can't help yourselves, can you? Reece James, Richarlison, Paqueta, Souček, Nico Williams, Hudson-Odoi, Sven Botman, Elanga Lacroix, Ake and Kluivert. That is a pretty decent list of additions there. The players that were making way, again, Gabriel Jesus leaving draft teams, Chalobah, Maguire, Gusto, Barnes, Bailey, Fulkrug, Martinez, McNeil, interesting, Areola, and Curtis Jones. So overall, I would say a pretty successful list of ins and outs there. Let's have a look at some key injuries, suspensions, and also departures, because as I said, we are in the January transfer window. So right at the top there, Diego Carlos has now left Villa. He's not in the Premier League anymore, so if you are holding on to him, he's to get rid of. Diogo Jota's injured again. We're not really sure exactly what the nature of the injury is. Doesn't sound like he's going to be out for too long, maybe a couple of weeks. Callum Hudson-Odoi's got a groin injury. We're still waiting for firm news on when he'll be back. Maybe not much at all, and he could be back this week. Kyle Walker has gone on loan to AC Milan, so he's a big drop. It's pretty decent ownership for Walker around the leagues. Tyler Dibbling, for those of you that have been hanging on to him, is going to be out for a few weeks with an ankle injury. Solanke is another big forward injury that we're going to miss for a little stint now, estimated to be out between 4 to 6 weeks. So I've got him penciled in for a return around game week 27. Teammate Brennan Johnson is also injured for a few weeks, expected to be back around game week 25. Johnson has been on a bit of a decline lately, not always getting starts, and I think this could just be the final straw that means a lot of managers, potentially myself included, throw him into the waiver pile this week. And then a relatively minor one, which is that Mavropanos got sent off in Game Week 22, so will be suspended in Game Week 23 and return in 24. But this is what everyone really wants to talk about in January. It's the new signings. We've got a few slides looking at the defenders, mids and forwards. The only goalkeeper really that's come in so far is Kinski, and we've already talked about him. Those of you that did need a playing goalkeeper will have already picked him up. So let's have a look at a few defenders firstly. Now, the first one I won't touch on for too long. That's Andre Garcia, who is a right back that Villa have signed from Levante, who are currently in the Spanish second division. He started virtually every game for Levante so far this year. He's still only 21 years old and adds some much-needed right-back depth, probably to allow Konsa to stick to centre-back duties rather than having to occasionally fill in over on that right-hand side if Cash is injured. Also coincides, as I just said, with the departure of Diego Carlos. Whether or not Villa look to add another centre-back before the window closes, we'll have to wait and see. But in terms of Garcia, not one I'm looking at in terms of draft. Next is Kusanov. He's an Uzbeki defender that City have just signed from Lens. 20-year-old centre-back, 40 million euros, so around 34 million pounds, is a decent amount of money for a relatively unproven defender. I don't know much about the guy, to be perfectly honest with you. Reports seem to suggest that he's come on leaps and bounds this season in the French league. They signed him for around 100k last summer, so they've made a pretty good amount of profit on him. What Pep chooses to do with him this season, I don't know. I would be surprised if he became a regular starter right from the off. He's right-footed, but has played a lot of left centre-back for Lens this season. For me, he's just a watch and wait. Next one is Woyo Koulibaly, who Leicester have signed from Parma. He's a French 25-year-old fullback, very versatile, can play on either side and is comfortable with both feet. I think Leicester probably need to get another centre-back or two if they're truly looking to bolster their back line and have a go at survival. But this is a start at least. We haven't seen him play already because there was a bit of delay in the paperwork ahead of the last game week, but I expect him to make his Premier League debut at the weekend against Spurs, where he may be lulled into a false sense of security as to how easy the Premier League is compared to Serie A. How much are we really going to be interested in any Leicester defenders at any point from now until the end of the season? Not much. So again, not really one I'm interested in for draft. And then the final one on there is Agbadou, who Wolves have signed from Rem for around £17 million. We've seen him play 290 minutes already for Wolves in the Premier League. No clean sheets yet. Wolves obviously got lots of issues structurally, few injuries at the back as well, but he has slotted right in there as first choice. So if and when Wolves do become a defensive unit that we want a piece of, then he will be a name on there. But otherwise, again, not really someone I'm considering at the moment for draft. And then a couple of midfielders. There are more, by the way. This isn't an exhaustive list. I'm really just highlighting the ones that may appear on your radar. I'm going to start with the second one on my list firstly, and that's Groenbach, who has joined Southampton from Rennes, where he hasn't really established himself this season. Attacking output hasn't looked particularly good. You can see there 2 goals and a single assist from just over 800 minutes. His non-penalty expecting goal involvements for 90 is 0.33, which is pretty below par, and that's obviously coming from the French league. So what he's going to be able to do translating that into the Premier League, we'll have to wait and see. A player coming in with poor attacking output seems pretty well suited for a stint at Southampton. Not one I'm looking at in draft at all. One who I'm certainly looking at, and one who I've got no doubt you will have been looking at yourself, is Doniel Marlon, who has joined from Dortmund, joined Aston Villa, who is a right-sided attacker. He's now 26 years old, so he's been around a little bit. And he's been at Dortmund now since 2021. He was pretty much a regular in their team up until this season, where he's kind of fallen slightly out of favour. Extremely consistent numbers in terms of expected output and his actual output, which has pretty much been 1-for-1 throughout his time in the Bundesliga. I think his position was one of the biggest needs Villa had in their squad. It's something I picked up on back in the summer when Diaby was allowed to leave. Bailey just really hasn't kicked on this season, and it's been a big letdown for them on that side compared to some of the depth they had, particularly from Morgan Rogers off the left side, and we've also got Jalen Ramsey can play off that left side too. So I'm pretty certain he will get game time. I think he'll get game time very quickly. Villa have a lot of games coming up, and he can't play in their Champions League fixtures until they get into the knockout phases, having already played for Dortmund in the competition. So I would not be surprised if we saw him start, or at least get a significant chunk of minutes off the bench in the Premier League as soon as this weekend when they face West Ham. Definitely someone I'm interested in draft. If you pass on the opportunity to grab him this week, somebody else will not pass that opportunity and you will not see him again. So if you've got high waiver priority, you'll need to gamble. And the odds are if you do have high waiver priority, you probably need to start making some bold moves anyway. Unfortunately, I'm not really down there for high waiver priority at the moment in my main 2 draft teams. So I think the odds that I get Marlon in my own teams are very low. But if you were down there yourselves, don't overthink it. I think he's definitely worth the gamble. And if there was a player floating around in the waiver pile with non-penalty expected goal involvements per 90 of between 0.5 and 0.7, you'd be interested in them anyway, and I think he should translate fairly well to that Villa squad. And finally, a player that I will probably cover again next week, and that is Omar Marmoush, who is so far the marquee addition to the Premier League this January, signed for Manchester City from Eintracht Frankfurt. It's that time of year again where all I'm seeing, and all you'll see if you're on any of the forums, is people asking, when will player so-and-so be added to the game? Marmoush will not be available this week, so just relax, don't worry about him, stop refreshing. He will not be available ahead of game week 23. He's only just been confirmed, officially signed this morning. So even if he were to be added immediately, it would still be too close to the waivers and he'll be locked. So don't worry about him. He will be available to pick up next week in game week 24. Let's be clear, if you have first priority in the waivers next week, Marmoush is the easiest selection you'll get to make all season and could potentially accompany Marlon if you were to pick him up this week too, and really freshen up your draft squad for the back end of the season. I am 90% sure he'll go in as a forward in the game, but you never know with the FPL peeps. They love putting forwards in as midfielders, and I also really don't see how City don't try to use him immediately. His finishing ability is top notch. His sort of career non-penalty expected goal involvements for 90 is pretty decent, just under 0.6. This year, he's firing along at 0.94. And for every XG he basically puts up, he's scoring 1.4 goals. So he's overperforming that too due to that finishing ability, and can really just hopefully be that sort of second backup goal scorer that Foden hasn't quite been this season with Haaland. And when you look at some of that supporting cast of Doku, Savinho, Grealish, there is absolutely no question that Marmoush is better than those guys. And yeah, I think he'll hit the ground running pretty quickly, and there'll be no excuse for him not to be put straight into the starting 11 as potentially as soon as this weekend. So that'll do for some of the new players. There aren't really any others so far. Obviously, any that come in between now and the next pod we'll update and put into the next episode. But let's have a look at some of the main picks, and I will warn you now, there are, as I said right at the top, a lot of fairly mediocre Everton and Liverpool players, because next week, as I'm sure you're very aware, they have a double game week where their rearranged Merseyside derby has been put into the subsequent midweek. So Liverpool have a cracking little set of fixtures now over the next few weeks. They've got Ipswich at home this week. Their double is Bournemouth away, Everton away, and then Wolves at home in game week 25. For Everton, it's not too bad either. They have got Brighton away. Their double is Leicester at home, Liverpool at home, and then follow that up with a trip to Selhurst Park for a game against Crystal Palace. So, yeah, I think as doubles go, and with not a lot else to really target, definitely fair game to target. Again, don't overthink it. If there's a decent Liverpool or Everton player there that you like the look of, now is going to be the time to get it, because you may not get them next week. So in terms of defenders, the only Everton defenders you might be able to have a sniff at are Mykolenko and Branthwaite. There is another one who's in hidden gem territory that I'll cover later, who is a bit riskier, but they are certainly there if you want them. The other one is Tsimikas. He's probably your easiest way into the Liverpool defence, but the constant switching between him and Robertson currently isn't obviously settling down, and the worry for the double would be that you only get him for one of the fixtures. The thing is, though, even if you did get him for just one of the fixtures in that double, that could still be well worth your investment. Liverpool have 5 games before that rearranged Merseyside derby game on the 12th of February. Ipswich in the Premier League, PSV in the Champions League, then a trip to Bournemouth. They then have their home game against Spurs, which is the second leg of the Carabao Cup. And then they have a game against Plymouth in the FA Cup, and then they have the rearranged Merseyside derby. So looking at the double and just thinking, well, Robertson will play one, Tsimikas will play the other, is not going to be quite the case, because we have no idea how they're going to be rotated throughout those cup games as well. Personally, I like the Tsimikas punt, which is kind of out of character for me, because I usually just stay away from these defender rotation headaches. But the tide does seem to be turning, I think, in favour of Tsimikas nailing down a starting spot as we head towards the business end of the season. And like I said a moment ago, even if you did get Tsimikas for just one out of the 2 of that double, I still think it's worth a go. Into midfield, and those of you that, if this isn't your first Draft FC pod, will know that we are pretty Dango FC over here. Again, purely because his roster percentage is still quite low, and lots of the other names we might consider are so high. He is there as an option that I know is going to be available for lots of you listening. I'm seeing more conversations about Dango Ouattara creeping into forums and stuff, so I think people are waking up to his ability there. The injury crisis at Bournemouth remains just as it was a couple of weeks ago, so we could expect him to carry on playing somewhere along that front three for sure. And it was very unfortunate in that last game that he didn't get a goal, but it was chalked off because the ball went out of play, so it was VAR'd out. Nottingham Forest at home in this game week, then let's say Liverpool at home, and then a trip to Southampton the week after. Plenty of more opportunities for Dango and his teammates to get some returns. And then the other one is another player who's sort of been on this slide for a couple of weeks now, and that is Dwight McNeil. With a view to this upcoming double, his ownership went down a touch overall last week, which is fair enough because we're not really getting firm news on when he's going to return. It sounds like he is getting very close. If he doesn't feature at all this game week, if he's not even on the bench, then I guess the concern would be for the double that he maybe starts the first one off on the bench and then maybe starts the Liverpool game. So, I don't think you're going to get 180 minutes out of him unless he did come and suddenly start this weekend, in which case I think it would look a lot brighter for him playing both in the double. So just one to keep an eye on. You maybe don't want to spend your first waiver pick on him this week, but could be like your second or third. And again, finally, purely because he is the only striker I expect to play this weekend with some semblance of availability, is Richarlison. Ownership's gone up to 63% now. I think with the injury to Solanke, he kind of has to start for Spurs against Leicester at home. So I wouldn't expect him to play 90 minutes because of his return from injury and struggles with fitness, but at least 60 to 70 minutes from the start I would expect. And so if he was available, may well be better than your current third forward option. Into some hidden gems next. These are players with generally less than 10% ownership, starting with Tyrone Mings for Villa. Quite like the look of their home game against West Ham this weekend. Decent chance for a clean sheet there, and owned in just 6% of 10-team draft leagues. So if you did fancy that too, then he is there. Likewise, we've been banging on about the Crystal Palace defence nearly all year now, it seems. And with Chalobah being returned from his loan to Chelsea, Chris Richards will continue to start at the right side of that back three. Ownership remains just 4%. Again, they've got a home game against Brentford. Though Brentford, you kind of back them to score against anyone. So by no means a guarantee of a clean sheet there. But just if you fancied it and needs must. And then finally, the other one that I'm sure will be well out of hidden gem territory by the end of tomorrow. And that's O'Brien for Everton, who we saw start over Young. Obviously, we've got Moyes coming back into Everton now. Usually one or two standard changes get made to the starting 11 as they're looking to put their stamp on things. And Ashley Young is potentially the main casualty here. We'll have to wait and see. I thought O'Brien looked okay against Spurs, but we'll know for certain. I think if O'Brien starts this weekend against Brighton, then I think he's going to be pretty nailed moving forwards. And then finally, some hidden gem midfielders. And starting with Everton's Abdoulaye Doucouré, continuing to start games under Moyes. It's been very quiet by his standards this year in terms of an attacking return. Again, if you're just looking for a body that you know is going to play both of those games in the double, then Doucouré will at least fulfill that and then always has a chance of popping up with a goal. Next are a couple of Ipswich players, or now Ipswich players for the time being at least. Jayden Philogene joined them on a permanent move. Quite an expensive one, I think around £20 million from Aston Villa. Came off the bench for their defeat against Manchester City. But I think we'll probably see him get his first start of the weekend away at Liverpool. Away at Liverpool is hardly the game that you're going to go and back a newly promoted attacker. But he's there, especially for the larger leagues. And then finally, Nketiah, who just today has joined on loan from Brighton. He's still only 21, but we've seen a fair amount of him over the last few seasons. I think going to Ipswich makes sense. It's an excellent move, I think, for all involved. He's made 44 appearances in the Premier League over the last 3 years, mostly off the bench. He scored 4 and assisted 4 in that time, with an overall non-penalty expected goal involvement per 90 of 0.66, which is excellent. But it's one thing coming on and running around like a madman for 10 minutes at the end. But it's another thing entirely to establish yourself from the start, especially at a team like Ipswich, who are going to be on the back foot a lot more than Brighton are. Another interesting one, just one to keep an eye on for now for the larger leagues. And then our final scraping of the Merseyside barrel is Ryan Gravenberch, who, the good thing with Gravenberch, similar to Doucouré, is that we know he's probably one of the most fixture-proof players for Liverpool in that midfield. The downside is, of course, he doesn't really tend to get involved in the attacks. He's pushing towards nearly 2,000 minutes for the season already and only has 2 assists to show for it so far, with an overall non-penalty expecting goal involvements per 90 of 0.15. Now, the way to look at this move is that, if he just plays the 2 games, and even if Liverpool fail to keep a clean sheet, you're going to get a minimum of 4 points, barring any yellow cards. And then a potential 6 points if Liverpool were to win to 0 in both of those games. So if you throw in a rare attacking return, it suddenly becomes a very lucrative 1-week punt. Now, the most successful manager in our home league in terms of league wins, loves making moves like this. This is a signature for that manager, and for a double game week like this, and I'm pretty sure he'll be eyeing him up this week. And as someone myself who doesn't have maybe quite so high a waiver pick this week, is a player that I'll be eyeing up to over some of the more sparkly picks that we've already discussed. And then finally is Minter. Big performance against Man United means he could have nailed down that right wing spot again, for now at least. Big underlying numbers, expecting goal involvement for 90, 0.64 this season. 3 goals and 3 assists now. Everton at home should be a good one if he plays. And finally, the most hidden gem pick, and a player I'm very surprised, bearing in mind this is for 16 team leagues. This player has now dipped just a smidge below 10% mark, and that is Matheus Nunes, who is a player we were touting for 8, 9, 10 team leagues at one point in mid-season. It's 9.7% now in 16 team leagues. Prior to the Champions League game last night, he started the 3 games prior to that at right back. Now got 14 Premier League appearances so far this season, 3 assists for non-penalty expected goal involvement per 90 of 0.29, which is by no means good at all, but it does remain a potentially starting playing Manchester City player. With Manchester City, any moment now we would expect to go right on back on the up to their previous form. Next fixture is Chelsea at home, which should be a good game. I say Nunes is by no means on the cards for most leagues out there now. This is definitely just most hidden gem territory for those 16 team leagues. I think the upside for having him in a 16 team league is definitely worth it. Predicted lineups have been updated earlier today, and I'll continue to tweak those as we get any news about injuries, press conference comments about returnees, etc. So check that out. You'll have noticed maybe last week that the site went down. If you're not a member, you'd have seen that the normal site went down for predicted lineups and everything else. That's all been fixed now, so you'll be able to see those as you usually would do in their usual home. So that is it for this episode. Another reminder that the game week deadline is at the slightly later time on Saturday at 1:30, which means the waiver deadline is also slightly later tomorrow at 1:30, Friday, the 24th of January. So by the time you're hearing this, there'll be way less than 24 hours to go before that. So make sure you're penciling in your moves now, and don't forget those new players, because obviously they'll be way down the list. They won't be high up on the form table. You will have to search them out. So yeah, Doniel Marlon is probably the main one you're going to be looking for. Again, if you appreciate the content, if you've been looking for some draft chat for a while and have only just found it, make sure you give us a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button. And for those of you listening on the audio, make sure you're following on whichever podcast platform you get your podcasts on. I'm going to leave things there because of time. Best of luck for your upcoming matchups for the weekend. Hope you get some of the players that you want, whether that's a brand new signing or possibly one of those guys who've got a double game week next week. And until next time, stay sure. Lens,